This recording is a brief introduction to my book Laurentia 2 Second Edition. I've never seen the movie Everything Everywhere All at Once, but from what I hear, there are ways to kind of trigger state changes and special events and stuff in your life, and that's kind of what the overall use of this book is. So the purpose of this particular recording is to tell people, especially those who are into astrology, and actually some people who are looking at statistical astrology and testing stuff and all of that, how to use this book. I'll try to be brief because this book has a lot of stuff in it. And if you're familiar with my other stuff on Amazon, then you know that I've been kind of on this steady journey for the last few years in my astrology studies to kind of um, get more of a statistical basis behind it because as much as I love it, as much as I um, kind of have learned how to use it self-taught like most people, it would be really nice to take some of the patterns that we see with our eyes and put numbers behind them. The big difference between Laurentia first edition and second edition is that whereas the first edition was basically qualitative, so there was 800 people that I knew, and I looked at patterns across 1,000 different asteroids. In this one, it's quantitative. So instead of 800 people, there's 46,000. Instead of 1,000 asteroids, there's 21,000. And the way that was done is because I had the population from Astro Databank, and I basically crawled through all of their wikis, both in the Astro Databank and on Wikipedia, looked for keywords, and then in a kind of similar way that we do genetics research, I did this kind of massive non-parametric study. Um, but what you need to know that's relevant to you is that you can use this book to get a better understanding of patterns in your life. Some people like the version of astrology that tells you what to expect. I don't quite trust that because, I like stuff that can be measured and not so much proven, but at least, something that's a little bit more objective. So you would use this book to better understand patterns you already know, not necessarily to predict. That's always funny trying to use astrology to predict things. But uh, basically, this book is divided into three major parts. So if I bring up the navigation pane here, it starts off with some methods. So for people who are interested in actually um, testing uh, asteroids and their meanings and stuff like that, they can follow my process. I tell you exactly what I did. I tell you the statistics and why and all of that other stuff and how I got to the asteroid interpretations in this book. And again, this is a huge difference from Laurentia 1. Um, the thing worth noting here is that you may not be able to see it from this view. Let me zoom in. Is that uh, I include significance values for the text mine. So I used three methods. One is called the wilcoxon-mann-whitney test. Another is the logistic regression, and another one is a kruskal-wallis test, also known as a one-way ANOVA on ranks. So it's an ANOVA, but instead of dealing with numerical values, it's dealing with first, second, third ordinal values, and it's trying to see if the distributions of these things that you're measuring are the same. So underlying most of this is the question, how can I tell what an asteroid does in the chart? I mean, this is an asteroid dictionary, and when you get to the actual second part of it, the dictionary itself, then you'll find not just interpretations of majors like the sun and the moon and Venus and all of that, but you'll also find interpretations of some calculated points that are important, like the North Node and Selene. You'll find major house cusps like the ascendant, and even minor house cusps. Now, of course, those are going to change depending on your house system. So I interpreted for these three house systems, and basically across these tens of thousands of charts, mined keywords and looked for uh, to simplify it, I'll just say correlations. They're not correlations, but basically non-mathematical in the non-mathematical sense, right? So I look for significant relationships between the keywords and each of these points, each of these asteroids in the book against some major bodies. Now, this is the main dictionary here. And one of the ways in which you can use Laurentia second edition is to just read through it and find some, not read through the whole thing, I mean, it's 800 pages, but um, you can find asteroids which interest you. So here's one, that which reflects a long time or a long way put into building. That reflects a long time or a long way put into building. That's weird grammar, but whatever. So, so if you want to look at something that takes a long time to build, then you might go into a chart maker and put the number 1304 in your additional asteroids, and it will tell you where Arosa is. So once you know where Arosa is, uh, because we don't have the normal Arosa aspect Sun, Arosa aspect Moon, Arosa aspect Venus, you have to interpret it in a little bit different way. You look at where each of these asteroid bodies are next to the sign, right? So if you have a Rosa in Sagittarius, then you're more likely to experience something that takes a long time to build when you're dealing with niches and cultures. Um, so there you go. That's just kind of FYI. And there's a lot of exploration that you can do. I'll tell you that over the course of the 4 years I've been working on this book, I've learned tons upon tons about myself and my exchanges, and I really feel like I've become a better person by learning these. One of the main reasons that I wrote this book and the first edition is because my background is in neuroscience, and my master's is in sociology, and my doctorate is in basically organizational leadership. And across those studies, you find that when you're trying to understand people, you are limited to some very uh, gee whiz, easy peasy Western constructs. The Big Five, for example, makes my skin crawl thinking that a world that is filled with um, really a lot of confusion, a lot of um, just uncertainty, tons of information, and people just don't have a lot of help um, understanding themselves and understanding why they run into the issues that they run into just in the world. And we need better frameworks, richer frameworks for understanding why we fight each other or we experience the fears that we do. And we have certain habits. We chronically ruin certain kinds of relationships. What you'll find throughout this book are asteroids which cover, I'm not going to tell you absolutely everything, but it is close. I mean, close. It covers, there is a lot of stuff because I drew these text mines from a vocabulary of 24,000 words, and those 24,000 words go all over the place. Let me see if I can show you an example. Here's one right here. If I can show you an example of a a table, which is kind of what these interpretations are based on. Here's one right here, Aschera. So I told you I use this massive kind of big data statistics here, um, and every single one of the asteroids in this book has a set of table entries like this one. But if I put that table for every asteroid, the book would just get too big. So I didn't do that. Instead, I only put it for some. It was kind of random which ones ended up in here. But mind on the wikis of people who had Aschera in what I call hot aspect to major bodies. In other words, conjunct, opposition, trine, and sextile to the Moon, Mars, Neptune, and four others. Uh, there was, out of 46,000 people, there was a group that when you only looked at the word competitive, they had the word competitive as being a keyword in their wiki article, and they also had a number of hot aspects between Aschera and the seven bodies that I used. Um, and it was the same thing with radar and profusely. So at the end of the day, Aschera was statistically significant in the logistic regression and the kruskal-wallis test, p.05, um, on these words. And that basically tells you that Aschera can be associated with a kind of story. It's hard to really look at this table full of words and know what Eschera does. So I spent the last 2 years doing exactly that for all 21,000, I believe it's 21,767 asteroids in this book, and turning them into this, which is the humanized interpretation of it. Now, I didn't just use this table. I actually used this table. Sometimes there was a hair of AI because the AI became available towards the end of it, and but I mark very clearly when I used AI, and I didn't use it very often. So it'll say from ChatGPT. Um, it, so, anyways, but um, I also used sanity check charts of people I knew well. And so when I was coming up with the interpretations for these, I also looked at 5 or 6 charts and said, okay, given where all of this stuff is placed, um, what story do these tend to tell? And so this isn't just a random Mad Libs on the list. It's actually taking the list and looking at it against real people's charts. Now, if you want to see more about this, it's not just a matter of saying Azagiri is in Capricorn or Azagiri is in Virgo, therefore, you know, um, mock modeling. I mock model with the characteristic of someone who's joining ideas, Virgo. If you're an astrologer and you want to kind of get some real detail here and you pull this up in your chart, then you can use this table. It's not just that you can, it's that you should. You should use this table here in the beginning of the book to get some real detail there. So the mock modeling asteroid that we just looked at, if you had it in this region, 13 degrees Pisces maybe, then that may be more likely to come with your self-talk. So like I said, you can learn so much and I hope people use this book to really kind of learn how to make better lives for themselves and their friends or something like that. I hope that it's helpful to folks. I mean, that's the whole reason that I'm putting this together as well, just to understand. I've got so many patterns, so many things in my life space, and this is anybody, it's not just me, um, which I want answers to, and you can get them, or at least get a framework for them through here. Another way you can use this book is at the very end, the index. Let's say, so the last 200 or so pages are just a huge index. And let's say that you wanted to, um, you're, let's just take nationalist, right? Nationalistic. Uh, you're like, well, my club is on some nationalistic stuff, right? Or no, this one's better right here, narcotic. So maybe you know somebody who has some kind of problem, and you're you want to know, man, what asteroids can tell me about that? What triggers it? Um, what it's correlated with? How do I frame this? So in this index, I have the top 5 asteroids that mined on each word, and you can see that Holbake is one asteroid that mined significantly on narcotic. I thought it was top 5, but seems like there's a little bit more than that. Huh, nice. Okay, well, maybe it's top 10. But I can go over to Holbeck or Thixton or Brawlower and let me do a search for Holbeck. Here it is. Okay, control of the menstrual cycle, its effects, and devices designed to regulate a domain's creative interface or hold it back. Uh, Speaking of that, another thing that's hugely different between Laurentia first edition and second edition is that In the first edition, I had um, more talk about males and females because it was qualitative and it was based on people that I knew. And I explain all this in the book. Unfortunately, uh, when it's based on observations of human behavior, it affects the kinds of interpretations you get, and they're more likely to be offensive, frankly. And it also hurts the ability to abstractify some of these. But with the text-mine version here, instead of referring to woman as such, I refer to women as domains and dominic energy because it's actually not women specifically. It's the energy of a space and how the space puts definition onto the things in the space. So instead of talking about women or feminine or female in so many places, because that's who I'm observing, then you're going to get something like a domain or a space or a context. Instead of talking about men um, or masculine or male, in a lot of places, I will talk about an asserter, an action, an energy that goes into a context, right? So if you think about it in terms of stuff that goes into spaces and the spaces themselves and how their character plays out, then you get an abstract version of male and female. So again, this is all in the book, but you can use this to uh, kind of find themes and the asteroids behind them. I think that's most of what I wanted to say about Laurentia second edition. I'll probably close this video with just a little blurb on my methodology. So I think the simplest way to kind of see my methods is through this table. So I ran my tests and I came up with, not came up with, the computer came up with significance values. And then here are the words, and here are my sanity check charts. And if you look at that duodecanates table that I showed you earlier, number 58 is someplace in Scorpio. Number 49 is also someplace in Scorpio. 143 is in Aries. This one's in Leo, and this was in Aquarius. But there's specific areas of those signs. And so I'm asking, what is common in these specific regions of these five people's charts that reflects this story? And that's how you end up with the final interpretation. Now, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but there's a sample of my full statistics file in there, and this is the method. I'm comparing distributions using these tests. These are the tests that I used. Wilcoxon-mann-whitney, logistic regression, and kruskal-wallis. To make a long story short, they're saying if the distributions between articles that had a particular word as significant versus didn't have that word as significant were um, if those distributions were themselves statistically significantly different. That's a mouthful, but that's basically how this was done. And for people who say, not say, but people who are kind of interested in astrology, or even people who just hate astrology and just want to debunk it all day, um, this is one method that you can use to at least look at patterns. There are lots of patterns, and as I mentioned, everything, everywhere, all at once, you can trigger some really interesting stuff if you know how. My suggestion is if you can, go on to some service and get as many of your asteroids as possible. Um, I mean, I got these 21,000 asteroids from a place I reference a lot, which is serenu.com. So they don't pay me. I don't know them. But back before I knew how to pull this directly through R and data and stuff like that, I just went on to Serenu and had it tell me where this whole group of what must be like 25,000 asteroids by now, where they live. And if you have the whole list, then you can go to town because these asteroids are basically from Serenu 4 years ago, the 21,000. Um, but yeah, you can go there, or you can go to, I believe his name is Mark Andrew Holmes. There's a guy out there who also has tons and tons and tons of asteroid interpretations. He's interpreted them a little bit differently, but you can also get some information about these asteroids there. Um, you can use this to fix all kinds of stuff. Um, and uh, by the way, I would be remiss if I didn't mention this. This is just a statistical point. The kruskal-wallis test is one of the major tests that I used here. And if you go on the internet, there are many places that may poo-poo the kruskal-wallis test because it actually, for huge sample sizes, can say that there's a statistically significant difference um, when those differences are very, very, very tiny. This is kind of like genetics research, though, and that's in the sense that you have a single chemical. Let's say that that chemical is, I don't know, serotonin. You're not going to be able to say serotonin is the feel-good chemical. Um, what you may say, I mean, you may say that as oversimplification, but serotonin participates in several pathways in several places in the brain and body. And there are other chemicals that also, dopamine and acetylcholine and NAD, and all of those guys, they also participate in these processes. And in the same way that in genetics research, you have tons of chemicals overlapping in their effects, with asteroids, it's similar. You're going to have tons of patterns which tend to pop up more or less in tons of processes. And so the tiny differences actually do distinguish one asteroid from the rest, which is why you needed whole lists for each one. But for this kind of research, um, you can use a really, really tough test like wilcoxon-mann-whitney, which I did. Um, but the assumptions behind what the wiki words mean is really kind of messed up, and they don't they Mann-Whitney is not really the best one for that kind of text analysis. Anyway, I could spend all day on that. That's just a research point because um, for folks who are really more into the methodology, it's kind of like, man, you have all these conclusions, but you used a very weak test. Well, I used three tests. One of them is very strong. But for just differentiating one asteroid from another, uh, a hypersensitive test was the thing that was actually more called for, especially when wiki words are subject to variance in their synonyms and whatnot. Okay, I think that's a good introduction to Laurentia 2. By the way, this is kind of a fun fact. I'm actually still trying to edit this book. The problem that I had was that when I went to the distributor, I could not find the proof button, and so it told me that um, you didn't order a proof. I'm like, well, when was I able to? What that means is right now on the 25th of April, 2024, there is a version of this book which has a messed up cover, and I really need to fix that cover. And also, this book has only been proofread 4 times. I do all this stuff myself, and so you can imagine going through an 849-page book 4 times and reading it. Um, my standard is 6 for when I publish. It's pretty hard to catch everything. So right now, I had to release the book so that I could order my own printed copy and finish the edits and fix it. So there's a small chance that the version of Laurentia that is out right now is gonna not be there in I don't know, I guess maybe a month or so. So if you're interested in this stuff at all and you want a version which has the messed up cover, it's very messed up too. It's sideways, but that is the version that exists. Um, yeah. Oh man, the publishing process is a mess, but I have a love-hate relationship with it. Right now, it's just a hair closer to hate. But anyway, that's the second edition of this book. I hope people find it useful in really getting new insights into their lives and your relationships.